Welcome to Craft, Design, Edit, Sleep, Repeat with hosts Lisa Conway and Nikki Jensen. Listen as we take a deep dive into the business of fiber craft design. Well, good morning, good afternoon. We have a very special guest with us today, Nikki. I'd like you to meet Michelle Hazell. Michelle helped me get into tech editing by answering all my questions, and she works with a very dear friend of mine, Nathan Taylor, the sockmatician, which is why I've invited her today.
Welcome, Michelle. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. It's great to be here, talking about lots of my favorite things, hopefully. So,
Well, anytime it's fiber related, we can pretty much talk forever, can't we? So today's topic is how we as tech editors help our designers that think really out of the box. When a designer has a new technique or a new way of construction, how do we help them word it so that others understand? And I've really asked Michelle here because she just edited Nathan's new book on double knitted brioche, which truly is a new technique. We can't find any reference to this type of knitting anywhere else. And believe me, we've looked. So, Michelle, what's it like editing a book, first of all?
yeah, books are obviously big. I think you've got the two sides to Nathan's book, particularly in that his book is not only a collection of patterns, but it's a teaching book, it's a storybook, and it's got a whole lot of extra to just a collection book, if you like. But you've got the whole additional layer of continuity within the book. So a bit like if you were working on a collection for a yarn manufacturer or a particular designer, you've got to keep in mind that things have to be equivalent and consistent and all of that. I think I enjoy the process of editing a book, actually. I think because there's much more space generally than you get certainly with the other print work that I do, which is magazines or pattern leaflets, which have to be very much more concise. Sometimes with books, there's more opportunity for notes and more opportunity for illustration, and that's quite rewarding to me. But yeah, obviously the whole process takes a lot longer too. So it's not, a week's turnaround. It's, in Nathan's case, several years from the initial concept, which I was lucky enough to be kind of in on, right up to the finished article. And that's almost like, I don't know, raising a child.
Yeah.
it's a big
Did
thing.
you edit just the patterns or all of the copy?
I did all of the copy. Yeah, and that was a bit outside my norm, I have to say. I've worked on some tutorial leaflets and things like that before, so it's not completely new. And my previous job was in technical writing in the healthcare field, so that's not particularly new. But I think Nathan felt that he didn't want to have multiple people. He didn't want a pattern editor and a copy editor if I would do all of it. So I did, which in this case I think was nearly essential because the technique is so integral, obviously, to the patterns because, as Lisa says, it's so new and so different. So that almost had to happen.
Did you have
really.
to learn how to do double knitted brioche in order to be able to edit it? Yeah.
I did. And that's why it was such a unique project in many ways, because I had to come at it almost in the role of a pupil. So the first manuscript was all I had. The book, as you have hope, I guess you've seen it already, is very rich in terms of imagery, and there are links to tutorials, and there's everything you could possibly want. I didn't have that. I had the written word, and obviously I had Nathan to talk to. But that was good because it meant that those words had to express everything. So you had to be able to do the technique just from the bare instructions. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've done brioche, I've done double knitting. I wouldn't say I was a guru in either of them. So in many ways, it was almost a trial process of the book at first, and then moved on to the more regular, you know, editing side
Yeah,
of it.
and I can see that being beneficial because sometimes when it's something that we're very familiar with and we already understand, we could we could gloss over things just by being by virtue of, I know what he means, so that's probably fine.
Mm,
Versus if it's brand new to you, just like the knitter who's going to be opening this book, then you're seeing it, like you said, with the pupil's eyes, and learning it
mm,
for the first time, and that could help you to make sure that everything is as clear as it needs to be.
mm. I think
Yeah,
that's
talking about the glossing over, I recently did a pattern that was using I-cord, and because I'm so used to the typical instructions of slipping it back to the other needle, I didn't really pay close attention to the fact that she was using double pointed needles, so you would tend to slip it to the other end.
mm,
Now, there were 2 factors there because there was still other stitches on the double pointed needle. It made sense to me that she was slipping them back. But in the end, she came back and she said, "Oh, we both missed this." And I was like, "Yep, I did. I missed it."
mm,
Because you're so used to the technique, you don't pay attention to that little
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
detail.
mm.
Yeah. Whereas, Michelle, I know that Nathan has talked in the past, and I'm using Nathan as an example here because he does write so out of the box. Um, Nathan said in the past that you often pick up needles and test what he's doing. Do you find yourself doing that with other designers or other patterns as well? How often do you actually pick up a set of needles and try something?
I would say I often do for something where it is a tutorial type. So a special buttonhole or an unusual cable or something where the wording is along the lines of do this thing, move yarn forward, do that thing, where it's hard to get your head around exactly what's going on. I find it much easier. I mean, you can see I've got a stack of needles behind me, and I always have somewhere in my chair pocket a ball of wool, and I don't you you don't do the whole thing. So I might make a little swatch and do a buttonhole just to check that those instructions where it says cast on, they mean to the right hand needle or the left, to get that
Mm-hmm.
precision.
Right.
And I'm a I think I got into tech editing through making mistakes. So for me, the only way to really the proof of the pudding almost is in the doing. And I'll so I not every pattern by any means, but where something's a bit odd, a bit unusual. And I'm a great believer in model making. So for some of the more unusual constructions, I like to make either a fabric or a paper model of the pieces, and then I might mark the seams in a particular colour to see how it all fits together. Um, so I'm quite a visual
Mm-hmm.
editor, and I
Very
like to
very
have
much
things in my hand.
yeah, very much
I
hands-on in the way
Mm,
you
I
do
do that with
things.
when I'm editing crochet. I find with knitting, I'm
mm,
so familiar with knitting because I've been knitting for 30 years, that I don't need to do it most of the time. But with crochet, it's like it's like my second language. So quite often, if there's a stitch pattern that's anything other than put put your next stitch in the stitch below it, I'll quite often have to get a hook out and test it out and make sure that everything is gonna land where it says it's gonna land.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you said that because I do that too. I sometimes think it's not cheating, but I sometimes feel that it's a bit, I should be cleverer than this. But then I think, well, no, actually. Also, I've done it where there's been a really big question mark with a designer where almost I say this and you say that, and actually making a swatch and showing them and saying, well, look, this is what I did. This stitch turns into that stitch. This is what I'm talking about. You can get much more of an understanding
Yep, I've done
between
that
you.
too.
And you do seem to hold those conversations with your designers. Are you close enough that you do those in person? Are they always done, online? As I mean, is it's much more common now than it was when you started to be able to do these face to faces across the distance.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first magazine I started working on, I'm lucky in that their offices are down the road. It's a 30-minute drive. So there have been occasions where I used to do some extra work for them as well. So physically being in the room with editors, magazine editors, I mean, that has been helpful. I don't tend to meet clients much other than socially, so at yarn shows and such. If we find out we're both going to be there, well, yes, we'll go and have a cup of tea and talk about often future plans and scheduling and, oh, I'm really pleased this went really well, or actually I'm going to revise that because it didn't go very well, that kind of thing. But yeah, the one of the silver linings of the last 3 years has been that I can say to someone, I really need to talk you through this. Could we Zoom at 10 o'clock? And we can literally, and sharing screens is so wonderful because you can literally say, oh, well, row such and such of the chart is, and point out, and it makes the job so much easier than having to write notes. And obviously, a tech editor's job, the fundamental thing you're doing is almost telling somebody they've gone wrong. It's a very difficult psychological position to be in. And somehow, face to face, where you can be a lot kinder because they can see your facial expression and hear your tone, which you can't in an email. You have to be very, very careful when you're communicating just in the written word. So for me, yes, absolutely. The Zooming, video call is
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, I think one of the earliest patterns I did was a brand new designer. It was her very first work. And it wasn't so much that the pattern was complicated as it was in creating the various sizes. It was a lace cardigan and trying to figure out how to word it because there was some very unique ways of shaping that had to be split out.
Mm,
And so we zoomed for like an hour and a half just trying to figure out how to organize it so that the sizing made sense. And that was a real help, at least for me. I hope it helped her. Um, but I know that for me, it was really helpful. And it was so early in my career, too. So it was like, okay, I, I really want to just chat about this because I'm not positive how this should go. And let's work it out
Mhm.
together. It makes it a collaborative
mm.
process, which I feel like is our
Mhm.
job, is to collaborate with these designers. So, yeah, I love that part of the last 3 years.
We have to take the good side where we can in all of it,
Yes,
don't we?
absolutely.
Yes, we do. Excuse me. Um, so have you ever run across something that the designer was saying in such a way that you felt it really could fit more into traditional knitting language? and then you had to convince them to reword it so that it made sense to the knitter.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something you do see with perhaps people at the earlier stages of their designing, maybe where they haven't necessarily got a huge background of knitting other people's designs to build on. So, I mean, we could have a whole episode about what is the standard knitting language, and I'm quite certain we'd never
Yeah.
come to a consensus.
Agreed.
But there comes a point where you almost have to say to someone, a lot of your audience are going to expect this to be written this way. And it comes down to also one of the things I like to do is talk to designers about who their
Mm,
audience is, because they might not be British knitters of a certain age who grew up with yarn company patterns that use, they don't say yarn over, they say yarn round needle and old fashioned things. Or they might be young, new people who learnt to knit by YouTube, who've never seen a written pattern because they've always watched a
mm,
film. Who are they? What do they already know? And it's surprising, actually. It's hard to find out.
mhm,
So you've got to almost cater to a middle way. So if you're going to say something, I think the person knitting needs to be able to find it out from a book or the internet or someone who's been knitting longer than them. That and if it's not something that is easily accessible, then perhaps you need to be adding a tutorial or notes or what have you. But yes, I mean, there are certain, like you say about splitting out sizing. That's something I felt that very much comes with experience. That you've seen other patterns that do that and the ways that other people grade. So you perhaps might find that easier, later on. But collaborating with the design is fantastic like that, because that really is two heads are better than one.
Yes, most definitely.
yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of the job too, is collaborating with designers. And I think that you can set a tone of, we're doing this together. We're finding the best way to
Mm,
write this pattern. We're finding anything that could be misinterpreted. Um, and and if you can manage that, then they'll thank you for finding their mistakes.
mm, absolutely. And it's lovely when clients realize that. I have one lady who she always writes at the sort of last email of a particular pattern, she always writes at the bottom, remember, we are better together.
Mm,
And I
Oh, I
really
love
try, and
that.
she's so sweet. I love that. That's true. And sometimes you beat yourself up, don't you, when you haven't necessarily found everything or someone points something out, and then you try really. I mean, yeah, and you think, well, actually, what I did find is hopefully much, you know, more of a problem than what I didn't
absolutely.
find, and that.
Yeah, because like I said, the I-cord situation, which what does it matter if you tell them to slip it back to the other needle or slip it to the other end of the double pointed needle? In the long run, they're still going to get the
Hmm.
I-cord,
Mm,
right? Either direction is correct. So, yes, I did have to remind myself that it was a minor error that I missed, that it wasn't critical to the end product, and what I had found was much more critical.
mm,
Thank you, because I'm actually now feeling better about having made that
Yeah,
mistake.
I had a moment like that last week too. I've had this designer I've been working with for about maybe 8 months now, but she sent me a lot of patterns. And she always lets me know when there's something. Usually it's just a small style thing, like, oh, there was a period still missing at the end of this, or whatever it was. She always makes a point to let me know when something's been found. And I always beat myself up. And then last week she asked me for a meeting and she asked me to edit her book. So I was like, I'm thinking, oh, I'm the worst tech editor. She always finds something I missed, and sure enough, she doesn't have that impression at all.
No, no, and excuse me. If they had a problem, they wouldn't come back.
Exactly.
You know, if yes, I think the we are perfectionists, aren't we? That's we wouldn't do the job if we
Uh-huh.
weren't. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that perfectionism can. This is what Nathan himself actually said to me not that many weeks ago about something in his book, and he said, it's all very well being a perfectionist, but you take it too far. And I thought, yeah, yeah, actually, maybe
But
I
isn't
do.
that why he hired you? No?
Well, there is that. I don't think he's got any ground to speak on because he is one of the most perfectionist designers I have ever worked for. When it's it's startling. And once I actually had to show him an example of the not perfectionist designer's work, anonymized, of course, and he was absolutely shocked. It was quite, you
I'll
know,
bet he would be because knowing Nathan and having talked with Nathan over this last 3 years about the process of writing the book and having to remind him that, you know what? It's okay if it's not perfect when it goes out. We really had to work on him with that. Let me tell you, the whole group of us, it was just like, Nathan, it's okay. At some point, it's still got to just get
Hmm.
done.
Yeah.
it, it's absolutely true. And I think particularly dealing with something so innovative as well that that I guess it's like any massive new thing, isn't it? It's going to have a learning process, and that's to be
Yeah,
expected.
and when
Right.
this new process gets into other knitters' hands, they're probably going to innovate on it further. So you it's
Mm.
not necessarily necessary for the first version to be perfect.
Exactly. And that's what many of us have tried to remind him on a regular basis. We have one other member of the group who is a very innovative designer that comes at things very much from Nathan's perspective in many ways. But she takes Nathan's work and expands on it, and he loves that. He absolutely is
Mm.
thrilled. She has already innovated some things within his double knitted brioche that we're just now trying to convince her it's time to write the
Mhm.
patterns
Mhm.
because she is brand new. She's only got 2 patterns out there. She's got 2 out. She's got a third one that we're working on that'll come out in June. So, and of course, I've ended up being her tech editor, which is
Oh, that's
really
great.
fun.
That's good.
I'm I'm actually doing my very first test knit because I knew the minute she started knitting this project, I said, "Okay, I'm going to edit it, but then I'm going to test knit this one
Mm.
because I really want to make that item and I really want to test everything in the
Mhm.
pattern."
Yeah, I think
And
that's a good idea. On occasions we couldn't do it with
Mhm.
everything, could we? But
no. Oh
yeah.
my gosh, no. If I knit everything that came across my desk, I mean, there's been so many that I would have loved
Mhm.
to. The lace cardigan, for example, I would have loved to have sat down and knit that, but I just, there was just no way. Um, but yeah, so she takes Nathan's work and she expands on it, and it's just been fun because getting the 2 of them together, oh my gosh, it is amazing.
Isn't it exciting though how fast this is moving? Because when I was thinking about coming on your show and talking about this in particular, I thought Nancy Marchant wrote the brioche textbook, if you like, only in
Oh,
2009. Now that in knitting terms was 5 minutes ago.
yeah.
So to have gone from that, where this comes into what we were saying about knitting language and specialist language for new things. That language only really became set down in print in that book. So it's evolving so quickly. And the idea that now that another knitter is taking on that work and taking it further, that's brilliant, isn't it? Isn't it a good time to be around all this?
Oh, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing, and I love the fact that Nathan has built this group around him that think in that manner. I've been slowly working my way through Nathan's book because, of course, my introduction to tech editing came thanks to Nathan and introducing me to Michelle. So I've been slowly working my way through the book. I love the way he looks at the detail of how those stitches go together. And I've learned so much from him and this group on how to look at literally how the threads move through the knitting. I mean, I've been knitting for nearly 50 years. I can read my knitting very easily, although this test knit is a triple knitted. And let me tell you, learning to read triple knitting is a whole new skill. Totally. And Michelle, of course, probably knows.
Yes. Sorry, I've got frog in my throat. Yes, I. It really does make you sharpen your wits, and that's quite rewarding as an editor, actually, particularly when you do a lot of it. It doesn't ever become boring. Don't get me wrong, but there's only so many stocking stitch cardigans in
Mhm.
5 sizes that you can
Yeah.
edit. You do get without something a bit more challenging.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
and certainly as well, some of the other people around who are doing interesting things with the way the yarn passes through and specific stitches that are unusual. That I find absolutely fascinating. It's really exciting.
The different styles of construction that are happening today.
Mm.
Um, I mean, how long has it been since the first person created the knitted in top down set in sleeve?
Ooh,
Or
yeah.
I've had a couple of people around me that have knitted the ziggurat style
Mm.
sweaters, and the construction of those is so fascinating. I will link to some of the patterns for that because they're top down, they're set in sleeves, and the way she creates like a whole new shape, uh, like a V-shaped neckline, starting top down with a set in sleeve. Oh my gosh, it is you. I literally watched a friend knit a swatch that was the entire upper portion of the sweater, just trying to figure out the technique that was used because it is so new and so unique that she couldn't visualize it just reading it from the page. And y- as an editor, that's one of the things that popped into my head when we were saying, you know, you've got to sometimes pick up the needles, and how much of knitting would it take to actually figure out, yes, this really works, right? And there's there's so many things happening in our world, in our knitting world right now. I don't know if the crochet world is quite as innovative, but the knitting world, there's just so much happening. And it's so fun as an editor to get those things coming across our desk and seeing, oh, how did you figure this out?
Mm.
Right?
Yeah, I think it's almost that it's really refreshing to see people breaking away from what I call the pattern cutting style of knitting, where it's based on essentially what the woven sewers are doing. So a piece is cut to shape and then it's seamed together, which knitters borrowed, I think, just culturally, and also because it made for quicker, shorter patterns. I think there's some of the knitting historians have probably got a lot to say about all of this. But now we're moving to a much more almost like a draping style, aren't we? Where knitted fabric is being made to fit the form, and from the top down, a lot of it seamless, very, very exciting. But it, yeah, the geometry sometimes. Mm,
Exactly. You really stretches our math
Mhm.
brains.
mm,
It really does. And I laugh because geometry was where my math skills just went
Yeah.
down the tubes. And it's not because I didn't understand geometry. It's because I had a bad teacher that insisted
mm,
that all we do is memorize, right? And so I didn't get the practical applications. I was 12. Come on, show me how this
mm.
fits my real life. And guess what I've done my entire life, right? Is and when it dawned on me that it was all geometry, I nearly quit knitting
Oh dear, oh dear.
because I'd
I know what
had
you
this,
mean.
you know, aversion to the word geometry for so long. And then I thought, no, wait a minute. What this tells me is that the grade I got in that class wasn't representative of what I could really do. I had to remind
Absolutely.
myself that it's another one of those situations where, you have to quit beating yourself up,
Yeah.
right?
And I think that people are very much afraid of maths. They're very much, a lot of people have your experience of a teacher who wasn't a teacher at all, in the sense that they didn't educate the pupil. They made things worse. And in my former life, I used to teach statistics to nurses. And the number of people who came through the door who said, I hate maths, it's the first thing they said. And you thought, right, okay. My answer to that was always, can you pay a bill? Can you book a holiday? Can you work out what things are cheaper in the supermarket? You don't hate maths. You're doing maths
Mhm.
all the time. And designers sometimes say, oh, I couldn't do that, too
Mhm.
much maths. When actually, it's a mindset, and maybe, yeah, teachers have a lot to
Yeah.
answer for.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. And as a former teacher, that's really kind of a funny thing for me because I was an educator in my former life. And so, yeah, we do have a lot to answer for. And I can point to the good teachers I had in my life that led me to want to be a teacher and say, "No, I want to be like this person, not that person. I want to be the one that helps the kid learn the why, not the how." Because if you teach a kid the why, the how comes
Mm,
naturally. I have homeschooled all 3 of my children at advanced levels. I will admit, when it came to calculus, I found an outside teacher.
Can't blame
I
ya.
think that's a fair choice, isn't it?
But, um, I have one in college. I have one that will be graduating next year that could have graduated this last December. She has literally accomplished all of her core credits. So everything from this January on is extra, literally. Um, I've got one that's been a little slow to start, but let's face it, he graduated the year of the pandemic. The failure to launch on that one in part was the
Mhm.
world. But I can walk through life knowing that my education degree didn't go to waste.
I think there's a role though as editors that part of what we do, particularly with designers who are at the beginning of their career, part of it is a form of education in the sense that you want to say to them the why. You want to say, well, I think it might be better if you said this like this because not
Yes.
you must, but I some also another thing is about saying, well, I've come across people making a mistake here because what
Mhm.
have you. And it's about that kind of, there's nothing nicer for me as an editor when you see somebody take on board what you've said and not do the same thing
Mhm.
again. That's so
Yeah.
rewarding. You
Yeah.
think,
Yes. Yes.
and also the opposite actually, where you suggest something to somebody and they come back with a really good reason why you're wrong. That's also very
Yeah.
satisfying too.
And I'll bet you Nathan does that to you a lot.
Sometimes I will
Whether
confess.
he's right or not.
To be fair, he doesn't actually. We've only ever once had a real moment where I've said A and he's said B, and we agreed to differ. Um, no, I think it's yeah, it is a, and it's a process, isn't it? We're also educating ourselves. Every pattern you edit influences the
Mhm.
next one,
Mhm.
um, and I think that's particularly true with these more modern, unusual things. The more of those you see, the less out of the box they seem, if
Yeah.
you like.
And I think
Right.
that is a very important role of the tech editor, especially in these out of the box designs, to take the designer's vision and say, how can we make this fit the language of knitting that we have so that knitters will be able to understand the vision and recreate it.
Mm.
I have one that I'm working on right now that's it's a pair of shorts with a lot of shaping. It's seamed, but there's just a lot of shaping to get these four pieces of fabric to become shorts. And we were talking about how are we going to grade this? How can we get all of the sizes like without writing out every size line by line 9 times? And and I recalled a pattern by another designer that I had knit that had a table that had each row of the design, or each row for each size. On row one, you're increasing, on row two, you're binding off, or whatever it is. And so I was able to bring that to the designer and say, maybe we can do it this way to make it more manageable so it's not 100-page pattern, right?
Mm. That sounds
Oh, yeah.
interesting. I I have to say I've worked on a couple of skirts, but the lower body, between waist and socks, is a bit of a desert to me. I must admit there are so few knitted lower body garments that yeah, grading shorts. That
Knitted lower body garments don't necessarily flatter the body as much as other knitted garments might, for those of us who are not of a
It's tough.
sylph-like
It's tough,
persuasion. Yes.
yeah. Especially,
Yes.
as I actually get more lower body garments than you would probably expect. A lot of them have negative E's, which obviously is not going to work for everybody. These shorts have positive E's, but they're seamed, so there's some structure to it. But they're knit sideways in cotton, and I'm like,
I was gonna say, I knew the pair of shorts you were
yeah,
referring
the
to.
cotton is
Yeah.
is driving me bonkers because the gauge is so all over the place. Every time I get a design in cotton, we have gauge issues. Um, but I mean, the pictures I've seen so far, they look great. Like I'm really excited to see how other knitters create their projects as it goes through testing. Um, but yeah, it's been a big challenge.
Yeah, especially grading that to make it look
Mhm.
right. I mean, such a unique garment.
Well, a lot of
And we had a big discussion about this pair of shorts because we were talking about the fiber and how it would affect the way the material stretched in wearing and how that was gonna
well,
need to be
yeah,
dealt
and
with.
I would have expected because they're knit sideways, but they're cotton. I would have expected them to grow in length because they're cotton, but they're still actually growing in um, width
Width
instead. Yeah, the
instead.
row gauge is growing instead of the stitch gauge.
Mm.
And that's very common with cotton.
Yeah, but usually you think because like when you're knitting side to side and in cotton, you'd expect gravity to pull it down when it's worn. But that's not what's
Right.
happening in this case because it was knit sideways.
I think that goes back to a little bit of what Nathan has taught me in terms of the stitch construction and why a stitch would stretch lengthwise versus widthwise, even though the gravity is pulling it width. When you combine the knowledge of what cotton does, it tends to be. Let me think about this so I can say it. Okay, you've got your stitch with the V at the bottom and the curl at the top. And so what's happening, it's pulling against that curl at the top and making it narrower while at the same time making it longer. And cotton will naturally do that regardless of where the gravity is affecting
Mm,
it. I think the way I've said that makes
yeah.
sense. I'm not
No, it
positive.
does. And that's
Yeah.
certainly what we're finding in this case. Yeah, just wasn't what I expected, but I should have known it wouldn't be what I expected.
Mm.
And there
But
again, that's another thing about being a tech editor with knowledge of fibers,
mm,
right? I have that unique background of coming from spinning as well as knitting and I weave as well. So I can see how the fibers work in the different constructions and have a little bit more knowledge of what that fiber is likely to do.
mm.
And I
Oh,
realize that's unique to me, right? But it just means that my clients come to me because I have that unique knowledge in ways. I seem to be working with a lot of clients that are translating their patterns into English, and mostly what I'm doing is making sure that the grammar is correct in English within the knitting
Mhm.
world.
mm.
That's the biggest proportion of my clientele
Mm.
right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's I mean, I have to say, I really admire people who write patterns in more than one
Mhm.
language. I think that's amazing. But there is certainly sometimes a sort of, it's not so much language, is it? It's almost dialect that that English knitting patterns say things in a certain way where when it's been, because I some of the print work that I do involves say a yarn manufacturer writes their patterns in other languages and they have them translated into English, but they're not always in knitters English, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
So a pattern translated from French will suit a French knitter down to the ground, but that's not how British magazine readers do things. So for example, the French seem to like to make a rib neckband separately and then graft it on, which is something unheard of in the sort of older clientele who buy our magazines. They'd just say, What are you talking about? We pick up and knit." So it's about translating that. So where they say, "Start your neckband and then graft live stitches," we say, "No, no, don't do that. Pick up and knit the same number around." And those sorts of things are a kind of different level, aren't they? Almost
Yes.
a nuance of knitting.
And and that's what I deal with quite a bit, because in many cases they're a designer that works in their own language, and they've hired a translator to translate it that doesn't really understand knitting language. And then you have the added issue of the switching it to English knitting language. So the bulk of the corrections that I'm making are not to how the pattern is written, but making sure that the language is going to be understandable by the English speaking knitter. And it makes it a lot easier to tell them they've made mistakes in some ways, because it's not their fault, right? They didn't write the translation, someone else did. Um, and in some cases, they are translating them themselves, and they know that their English isn't good enough. I have this dear, sweet, adorable, love her to death Icelandic knitter that I've started working with, and she knows that while she's translating her patterns into English, her English is definitely a second language for her, and she knows there's going to be a multitude of errors. And so it's real easy to say, well, we would say it like this. You could say it like this or this, right? There's a lot of, it's not cut and dry. In a lot of cases, it's, and she's also very innovative in her designs. So there's that added out of the box kind of thinking to a degree, because she's not writing the typical Icelandic sweater. And so it's a suggestion. Well, okay, you've said it like this. You could say it like this or like this, and it would mean just it would translate just a little bit better. And there's a lot of that I do. Rather than cut and dry, this is incorrect, you need to say it like this. It's a lot of, well, maybe you could put it like this, that kind of thing.
So,
So,
apart from picking up the needles, what do you both do when you get a really out of the box design and there's, you need to grade it or something like that? How do you approach something that's so different? Do you have favorite resources?
I think it's difficult to say that there's any one particular thing that I would go for. I mean, you can probably see behind me, I've got a massive collection of books. Um, the sort of basic standard Maggie Rigetti, Shirley Page, and those books. I'm also a big fan of Monsi Stanley's books. She goes into quite a lot of detail about stitches as well, which they're always useful resources. In many ways, I think I model making is a big one for me, um, and also thinking about sometimes, like I think I said earlier on about swatching and seeing how different parts would fit together. Um, the other thing I generally, I mean, yeah, I suppose it partly also I'll look at what's going on in the sewn world. So if somebody's taking their influence from how something would be done there, well, I'll go and, you know, particularly when you get something that's maybe a jacket or something like that, you'll think, well, yeah, why is that made like that? What are they doing? Why? Um, yeah, and I think it's important to know what's out there in terms of tutorials. If somebody's writing their own tutorial for a particular stitch, or recommending one, obviously as an editor you would go and watch it to check it's the right
Mhm.
thing,
Right.
and to check it's doing what they say it's doing. But also, is there something else out there, um, that maybe does things differently, or is a cast on called by a different name? um, things like that. And there aren't many editing resources themselves. I think in some ways that's a good thing. We don't have this manual of rules that we have to stick to. But in some ways, it would be quite nice sometimes to just say, oh, I wonder how other people. And that's where colleagues come in, isn't it? It's great to have somebody that you can get hold of and say, oh, I don't know what to do here, or am I along the right lines? Um, that's one of the things I like about my magazine work, in that it's done in pairs. So we do half each and
Oh, that's
review.
great.
So you've always got somebody to almost second edit your work, but also to ask questions and to discuss and say, well, I would write it like this. What do you think? And that's sometimes you could do that with a designer, couldn't you? They could be your resource. You'll say, well, what were you thinking when what was your aim here? Or have I got this right? Or um, that kind of thing.
Being
I
really
think,
open to that conversation between you and the designer.
Mhm.
yeah, definitely. I think the other thing, going back to what we were saying about geometry and maths, I should declare it a tame resource, in that my husband's a mathematician who specialised in topology at university. So if I have a question about geometry, I have
Oh,
someone to
that's
ask.
fantastic.
It's great.
Isn't it
Yeah.
wonderful when you have those people in your life? I would have to say that the modeling that Michelle mentioned is a common thing for me. Graph paper is a must
Yeah.
in my life. There is always a pad of graph paper around,
Mhm.
always, and I will often resort to, especially when I'm checking charts, I will resort to actually recreating it on graph paper just so that I can see that the stitch counts are working, because I find myself not able to compare what's on the screen. I also print
Oh,
every pattern,
really?
Do you? That's
um,
interesting.
because I have discovered that I edit much better on the piece of paper than I do on the screen. Now, I do have a very odd visual issue that affects depth perception. And therefore, I think sometimes that interferes with what I'm seeing on the screen. So I print every pattern in order to edit it. So I have a file drawer of patterns, um, and I edit it with a pencil, and a red pencil, my little two tone pencils. Here, for those of you who can see here, my little two tone
Oh,
pencils.
cute.
Oh, nice.
The girls can see what I'm holding up is a pencil that on one end is blue and on the other end is red. On this one, the red side is definitely
It's a lot
much
shorter.
shorter than the
Yeah.
blue. But the blue was a lot longer. They get just kind of reversed in my hand, and I don't necessarily use one color for a
Ah.
certain thing or anything. But these are my friends. These are all over the house,
Mm.
because it doesn't matter. I don't have to be sitting directly at
Mm,
my desk
mhm.
to work until I'm actually plugging numbers into the
Yeah.
spreadsheet,
Yeah,
Mm.
right? And I've been doing a lot more of that on a laptop of late, so that's
yeah,
another part
I'm
of
of
it,
a,
but
a slightly different generation. I've been using a computer since I was 5 years old. So I do everything, all of my editing on the computer, but I do love to use Stitch Mastery to chart things out. So that's my version of graph paper. But a lot of times, if it's whether it's short rows or a lace pattern over increases. I loved using Stitch Mastery to make sure that it's all working
Mm.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
I'm
see,
the
that's where I
same.
automatically pull the
Yeah.
graph paper out. It's just
I'm a mixture. I don't know. Some things I will chart with Stitch Mastery. Other things like
Mm.
sock heels, I have a really odd way of drawing them as a diagram on squared paper, just because that's the only way I can get it right in my head, and it takes 5 minutes, and
Yeah,
I know
you've
it's
you've
done.
got me there. Sock heels are
Um,
the only thing I do on paper.
isn't that funny?
Yeah.
We both do. I must say, I do occasionally like a change, and if I'm doing something like charts against written instructions, I like to do that on paper. I find that hard
Mm.
work on the screen, even though I've got two
Mm.
big screens. And also just for a breath of fresh air in terms of location, take yourself away from the from the computer
Mm-hmm.
for a little while
yeah.
and edit
Mm-hmm.
on paper. You know,
Yeah,
it's
all of my first edits are done on paper, every single one of them.
I'd drown in
Yeah.
paper if I did that.
Uh, I, I have a professional grade printer over here that my husband insisted upon getting, which has been the bane of my existence for many things, but it does print
Oh, nice.
double-sided.
Mm,
So, and it's a laser printer, so the ink even with the number of patterns I've been printing and everything, the ink lasts for years.
Nice.
It's expensive up front, but it lasts forever. So, um, yeah, I print everything first and I go through it first on paper because I know I catch more that
Mm-hmm.
way.
mm,
Every pattern that I've ever tried to stick just to the screen, I've missed too much, in my opinion. So it gets double edited in the long run because I track all my time when I'm doing the paper edit, but then when I go to um, actually do it on the file, I'm reading it a second time almost to catch where all
mm.
those edits go, and so uh, yeah, I do catch a lot more that way.
Nice.
It's just the way my eyes work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
So
think when I'm grading these kind of unique constructions, I have to imagine it in something that's more familiar. Like I got this one, Lisa checked my grading for me, but it was a front panel and then seamed on side panels and then seamed on sleeves, but the sleeves didn't attach to the side panel, they attached to the front panel. And so I'm going, well, this is kind of like a set in sleeve, but it's kind of like a drop shoulder. It was an interesting hybrid.
Mm.
And yeah, just wrapping your head around how those pieces fit together.
Mm.
well, and checking the grading on that was different too because you had to literally visualize each
Mm-hmm.
panel and what each panel was doing before the sizing and the stitch counts made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And s- we double check each other's grading. That's we have a special deal there. So, um, yeah, that one was definitely a challenge to figure out where everything was fitting in. And oh, that's where the schematic
Mm.
and that's where sitting down with a piece of graph paper and drawing it for me would have helped
Would
me grade better because um, I would have been able to see how the pieces were being shaped
mm.
and where the changes needed to happen for each size. Because that's another thing is on grading that one, where do you increase or decrease sizing was very dependent on how that center panel followed up the front of the body.
Right. That sounds really challenging, and relating that to a known set of body measurements, we don't have enough. We only have sleeve length, chest, waist. A lot of the angular measurements, I sometimes find that particularly, you think, well, what's the angle where this measurement meets that measurement, and how is that going to? And I think sometimes it's easy to get very wrapped up in that, isn't it, with these,
Mhm.
um, and perhaps hopefully the knowledge of fibre comes to the rescue, and you think, well, actually there's quite a lot of drape in that area, so if it's half a centimetre different here than there, well, it's about understanding how the garment is going to work. But yeah, coming back to the cotton shorts,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think a really important tool for me on both of those designs has been the ASTM sizing charts, because you have so many more body point measurements to work with. Because, like figuring out on the shorts, we have to figure out like how much. It's not short row shaping because it's sideways, so it's like it uses increases and decreases instead. But how
mm-hmm.
much booty shaping do you need, right? And how much length the
Yeah,
ASTM has a crotch length,
yeah,
which measures from the front waist down under to the back waist. So we
yeah.
can kind of use that to figure out the the curve of the shaping of the front and back panels. But it's been really, really mind bending.
And
Yeah.
and that goes back to understanding your sewing
And
construction.
fortunately, this designer is a sewer, so he's got a really
Yes.
strong understanding of
Yes.
that.
And
That,
understanding the how you take a flat fabric and make it curve, because if you can understand it from the sewing point of view with a fabric that doesn't mold
stretch.
the
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stretch the I wanted a different word than stretch, because it's
No,
it's the way it molds the body,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Cling,
And
I suppose. Yeah,
yes, so at that point, when you can understand how to create the curves in a piece of fabric that doesn't do that, and then adjust for a fabric that
Hmm.
does, there's a a big learning curve between those two
mm.
things, right? Yeah,
And
and
I think that there's also an element there where that I think the importance of test knitting is going to come in for things like that. And I don't think there's any shame in that, to say, actually, this is really unusual. And we need to see how this works on a human
Hmm.
body after, and the two, it's not one or the other, edit or test knit, it's edit and test knit,
oh,
because
I'm a firm pusher in doing both for every
Hmm.
pattern. I mean, very rarely would I have a pattern that doesn't need to be test knit. Um, I mean, even this triple knitted item, it's something as simple as a cowl. I was like, okay, I'm going to test knit this because I need to see, because there's some very unique construction in it. And I said, but I want you to make sure that this person tests it too, because I knew that that person had the knowledge to test knit all of the different aspects of it and let us know, hey, you need to reword this way, because it was just completely, it's it's a triple knitted argyle cowl with Latvian braids that are reversible. So there's a Latvian braid on both the front and the back.
Wow.
that,
Yeah.
that gives me, yeah, fear and excitement in equal measure.
Goosebumps.
And so it was like, okay, I'm going to test this because I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Plus, I want the item in the end. I said, but I want you to make sure that person test knits it. And she's like, oh yes, he's already agreed. we're coming towards the end of it because her expected release date is in June, so we're getting there.
Watch this space. I'm intrigued about that one.
It's called the Argyle with 3
Okay.
R's.
With 3 R's.
We tried to talk her out of it, but oh well.
I love it. I
Making a
love
note
it.
of
That's
that.
adorable.
So we have reached an hour, guys. Isn't that amazing that we could talk this long about something as simple as out of the box tech editing?
We could probably talk all day about out of the box editing.
We really could. And if there's anything I would love to do, it would be to spend the day talking to the two of you.
Well, we can count it as continuing professional education, you know.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. This has been such a joy, Michelle. I'm so happy you were able to join us. I would like our listeners to know how they can find you, and are you taking new clients?
I am, but in a fairly limited way. I am quite busy, and obviously I do have quite a lot of long-standing commitments. I'm known as Sticks and String, which is STIXNSTRING, and my website is www.sticksandstring.com. You find me there. If people want to get in touch, that would be great. I can't guarantee that I can take them on because, as I say, I am quite busy. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you both, and yeah, I'm very excited to be featured on your podcast.
Well, I tell you what, we may just have to have you back.
Oh, well, that would be a pleasure.
This has been just too much fun.
I have to say, do I have to edit another 460-page book before I can get on it?
No. No. Just make sure Nathan keeps on writing the patterns that are in his backlog.
Oh, I know.
We've got to work on that Northampton because he keeps saying the chart on that is not doable. The shawl that looks like the peacock feathers.
Oh, yeah.
He keeps saying the chart on that one is impossible, and so we've got to keep working on that one. Although I will happily say that he's finally started working on writing the Genesis shawl.
Well, good.
When was that one? 2011, something like that?
I wasn't going to try and put a year on it, but it's quite a few years ago. That was quite early on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stopped nagging him about that. I'd kind of forgotten about it.
Oh, I haven't quit nagging him at all because I want that one in the worst way. I really do. I love that shawl. Anyway, it's been absolutely fantastic. Michelle, thank you so much. Nikki, I really appreciate your being here, and have a great day. Don't miss the next episode where we'll chat with Kirsten Jordan, a digital marketing wizard who knows how to make social media work for small business. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you listen, and join the conversation in our Ravelry or Facebook groups. For technical editing, find Lisa at arcticedits.com and Nikki at handknitsandhuga.com.